Welcome, everybody. My name is Elizabeth Ahrens. I'm in the Mergers 4 division at the FTC, and thank you for joining today's presentation, which is part of the seminar series we're having this summer to show the types of information NTEU can provide that's relevant to the federal workforce. As you may be aware, we're going to be having a union election, hopefully beginning later this month. But this year is also the year of our presidential election, as well as many state and local elections. So we thought it would be a relevant time to have a presentation on the Hatch Act and its implications for the political activity of federal workers. I encourage everyone to fill out the very fast automatic survey that will pop up when you leave the meeting to help us continue to provide relevant content. And thanks so much for filling it out last time. We got a great response after the last presentation. So now I'm going to turn it over to Allie Giles in NTEU's Office of General Counsel to walk us through the Hatch Act.
Thanks. Hi, everybody. My name's Allie Giles, and as Elizabeth said, I'm hoping this short presentation will be of use to you and give you a sense of the value of our union. We're here to give you information, to be a resource, to answer questions, and we help our members if they end up getting in trouble, which hopefully doesn't happen, but we are here to help if that does happen. I mentioned this first slide that the Hatch Act was enacted in 1939. I just mentioned that because many federal employees find it restrictive and somewhat onerous, but it used to be much worse. In 1939, federal employees were really restricted from doing just about anything political, even off duty. So it has been amended several times to make it a little more reasonable. NTU is one of many unions who have worked to make it more reasonable because that's what our members want. I will say people do find it sometimes chafe under its restrictions. It is also here to protect you. The Hatch Act is supposed to stop your supervisor from coming by your desk and asking, hey, come into a campaign event that I'm organizing this weekend, or can I count on you to make a donation to a candidate I like? It's there to protect you, but it does have some restrictions on what you can do. Before we get to the things you can't or shouldn't do, I do want to emphasize there are many things that, of course, you can do, and I hope you do. You have rights, and you should do everything you can to participate in our political process. So off duty, please get out there and vote, support the candidates you want, go to events, go to rallies, put a yard sign up, donate money. Again, we'll talk about doing these things off the work site, but please be engaged for the candidates that you like. So generally, what does the Hatch Act do? Generally, and I'll come back to that word because there's always a few exceptions, but it usually restricts partisan political activity while you're on the job. So that sounds easy enough, but as you might guess, there's a devil in the details. What exactly does partisan political activity mean? What does on the job mean? Partisan political activity is any activity directed towards the success or failure of a partisan candidate or political party. So there's the word partisan. Most political races that we think of are partisan, but you might be involved in like a local school board race or something that simply isn't, and the Hatch Act doesn't apply. It does apply to partisan candidates or political parties, so advocating for or against a Democratic or Republican Party or majority in Congress counts as being covered by the Hatch Act. What is not partisan political activity includes talking about policies. You are allowed to talk under the Hatch Act about policies that you like. You hope Congress doesn't have a shutdown. You hope Congress enacts a good pay raise. You're allowed to talk about who is sponsoring those things. Congressman so-and-so has a bill to increase pay for federal employees. I sure like that. That's not a Hatch Act problem. Talking about Schedule F or other policies that worry you is not a Hatch Act problem. We are talking today about Hatch Act. Obviously, if you spend all day talking about getting a pay raise and not doing your job, you're going to have a problem. It's not a Hatch Act problem, but it's going to be a not doing your job kind of problem. But again, so partisan political activity is what is covered. Policy discussions are okay. I sometimes think of the prohibited, limited partisan political activity as shorthand for election-related stuff. Again, you can say, I hope we don't have a shutdown. You can say that. Stop short, though, of taking the next step and saying, therefore, I think we should elect so-and-so, or not elect so-and-so, or I hope the parties change in Congress. Just stop short of the election-related discussions. Now, what does on the job mean? It means in a government building, or during your working hours, or using a government device, like a computer or a phone. It also means being in a government uniform, but I don't think that applies to you all. NTU does represent people like folks in the Park Service, law enforcement, CBP, and so they have to be concerned with the uniform application as well. But for you, it means usually in the government building. Some of you may be in the office, many of you may be remote working. It applies to any government building, not just your office. During work hours, that's usually clear enough. When you take a short break, you get a cup of coffee in your building, people don't have water coolers anymore, but if you're chatting by the water cooler, those are all work hours. Your lunch break is actually not your working hours. That's your own time. But many people during lunch breaks, like right now, might be on a government device or a government phone. So we would try to keep information shared with you during a lunch break Hatch Act compliant. But if you left your government office and went to a Starbucks and were on a personal phone, you would be allowed to do partisan political activity because your lunch break is your own time. If you all unionize, usually union officials get what's called official time. They get some allowance for doing union work during the work day. Hatch Act also applies to official time because it's government funded time. Now, I talked about things the Hatch Act generally applies. There's a few things you can't do even when you are off duty, so even on your own time. It generally applies when you're on duty, but there's a few things you can't do even off duty. You cannot be a candidate for partisan political office. Again, if you want to run for your local school board and it's nonpartisan or some other nonpartisan position, that's okay. You can't fundraise for partisan political purposes. You can donate, you can go to a fundraiser, but say a friend of yours is having a get together at their house and says, hey, do you mind passing the hat? You can't do that even if it's your own time. You can't forward emails asking for money for partisan political purposes. And you can't use your official position to influence election results. That comes more under the bailiwick of don't abuse your position. So I think that probably makes sense. But if you were an IRS auditor, you wouldn't want to imply that your position and your decision to audit is somehow related to election outcomes. So the main thing that probably affects most people is that restriction on fundraising. Let's skip the slide here. So what does all this mean in practice? As you can probably guess, it means you shouldn't have a big campaign poster at your work desk. You should not wear a campaign button if you're on a work Zoom call. The trickier part is that many of us check our phones or our personal computers during the day, a lot, even on work time. That's what many of us do. You might get an email or a text from a friend or a Facebook post about a campaign event or an election issue, and you decide to share it with a friend. That is considered partisan political activity. You shouldn't be forwarding that material if it's during your working hours, even if it's on your own phone. You also shouldn't be sharing it on the work phone, even if it's after hours. So if it's on a work phone, work device, during working hours, government building, you shouldn't be sharing election-related material. It can be easy to forget because it's so easy just to forward information that somebody sends to you. Now, how about if you're off duty and a friend sends an email about a candidate they're excited about, and at the very bottom, there's a fundraising pitch. You might not even notice that, but when you share that and assume you're doing it off duty on your own phone, but you can't actually do that even off duty because now you're promoting fundraising. again, that's easy to forget because we all get so much information and it's very, very easy to share. But I would be careful about social media. Think about it when you're using your phone. Think about whether you're on the workplace. And again, even off duty, be very careful about fundraising. And when you're on duty, just be careful about what you're sharing and talking about at the workplace. Again, policies, okay. Campaign materials, not. There's a lot of gray areas you can imagine. There's a whole office called the Office of Special Counsel, and they investigate Hatch Act violations, among a lot of other things. They handle whistleblower complaints and things like that. And they put out a lot of guidance on what's allowed and not allowed. And of course, sometimes it's just very, very finite line drawing. Like, for example, can you put a campaign bumper sticker on your car if it's your own personal car? Well, sure. But now what if you drive that car and you park it in a government building while you're at work? So the Office of Special Counsel has said, well, you can have 2 campaign bumper stickers, but not 3. So it just shows you that sometimes they have to make what may seem like arbitrary line drawing on what's allowed or not allowed. Having Fox News or MSNBC on at your workplace, that's not considered political activity. That's a question that OSC got. Someone might think one or either of those media outlets seems political to them, but they're not considered political. So again, just be careful about social media on your own phone. Be cognizant of whether you're on the job or not on the job. If people do get in trouble, the only penalty is job related. It can go all the way up to removal, but this is not a criminal statute. And normally discipline is far short of that, but it can be job related discipline if someone gets into trouble. What does NTU do? We are politically active. We have to be because many of your benefits are tied to what Congress does and what the president does. So we would be remiss if we were not active on the Hill and lobbying for bills that we like and lobbying against bills that we do not like. And we have a political arm. We are very careful with our members. If we communicate with you about political matters, we'll send it to someone's home email address and usually with a warning saying this is Hatch Act material, don't share it on the job, and then you can then access it at your home email at a later time. That's just one of the benefits if you chose to join NTU, that we are politically active, but we're very careful to protect our members by segregating the material and sharing information appropriately if it's policy information. But if it's Hatch Act at all a risk, we put a big warning, send it to home email, say, open this on your own time and keep it very, very clear. That I would be happy to take any questions. I can't promise I can answer all of them because there is so much funny line drawing that can be drawn. Like I said, 1 or 2 bumper stickers okay on a car that you keep in a government building, 3 is not. But I'd be happy to answer questions either live or in the chat. And this last slide is just sort of a general reminder of the things that are allowed and not allowed. Of course, if you're teleworking, and it's during your office hours, that's considered on the job. Hopefully, many of you do have the right to telework. I know people like that, but it still applies when you're home. So that being said, if anyone has any questions they want to throw into the chat or just say it live, I'd be happy to take a stab at that.
Looks like there's a question in the chat.
I'm having trouble getting that.
Question is, what about sharing policy views of political candidates?
Yeah, so I would, it's certainly okay to say, I like X policy about the border or abortion. I mean, some of these may be political hot potatoes. You can decide it might be prudent to be careful who you're talking to. And it's technically okay to say, and this policy is being advocated by candidate Harris or candidate Trump. To be on the safe side, you might want to just keep it separate from the candidates. Just talk about the policies that you like. But it is factually okay to say who is advocating for which policies, but it starts veering a little close to any implication that you are supporting one person for office and not another person. So again, policy discussion's okay. But you could avoid mentioning the candidate aspect of it just to be on the safe side.
We have another question in the chat that asks, some unions make partisan political endorsements. Does NTEU ever do that? If so, how does NTEU manage decision-making about endorsements?
We definitely do. As I said, we sort of think we kind of have to, given how many of our workplace issues are tied to who is the president, as well as who's in the Senate and who's in the House. So we decide who to endorse at our conventions, and we keep that information, again, when we're talking about if we're encouraging our members to get active, we send that sort of separate from the usual communications. We send it to home email addresses, and it usually has a Hatch Act warning. But yeah, you're probably seeing in this election, there are definitely endorsements happening. NTU has not made theirs for this year yet, but they will. And of course, that finds its way into the press. So.
There's a hand up and a couple questions in the chat. Do we want to?
Yeah, I see Paul's. What if a spouse wants to engage in partisan fundraising? They absolutely can. That's allowed. But just be careful about your involvement. So if your spouse is saying, please come to our house sponsored by, and you mentioned both spouses, you shouldn't do that if one of you is a federal employee. It should just mention the spouse who's not the federal employee. It could be at their house. And again, the other spouse, family member, can certainly donate, but they should keep their name off the fundraising materials, the invite. They should just be there as a donor and not as someone running the event. Let's see, Elise says, a common misunderstanding is that federal employees are not able to participate in canvassing and get out the vote activities on their own time. You're right, you are, if that's people's understanding, that is a misunderstanding. You are allowed to canvass and get out the vote activities on your own time. You should definitely do that. In fact, get out voter drives used to be sort of okay, even on the job, because they were considered nonpartisan. We don't recommend people do that anymore because there's just so many different state rules. It's just too easy to run into problems. So I would say do it on your own time. But please do canvass and go to rallies and engage in political activity. Just do it on your own time. And as you say, as long as there's no fundraising component. And get out the vote activities are terrific. Phone banking, postcard writing. I would encourage everyone to do that.
I got a question directly that says, what can you do if you want to run for office? Do you have to quit?
I don't know if you could take a leave. I'm not actually sure. I certainly can quit, but I'm not actually sure if you take a leave, stop your pay. I'd have to check on that. I'm not actually quite sure. So if you want to run into office, that's something you should talk to your union person. We'll look into it and get back to you before any steps are taken. I'm just not sure.
Also relevant whether it's a like a partisan position or a nonpartisan, because I know in DC the ANCs are nonpartisan, so you can run for and be an ANC representative while being a federal worker. So that's one example.
Yeah, I think of most politics as being partisan, but I think that is true. There are a number that are nonpartisan. So that's the first step. If it's nonpartisan, then you don't have a problem. If it is, we would have to look into whether you could just take a leave of absence and that would be okay.
I got a question emailed to me. Can you think of any reason why lawful campaign contributions in 2024 could be used against employees in 2025 or a later year? There are public databases that purport to show the names, employers, candidates, and amounts given by any employee. Any cause for concern with those searchable databases and retaliatory actions?
Well, I mean, there's a statute called the Prohibited Personnel Practice Statute. It is supposed to stop any agency employees from taking personnel actions for sort of non-merit-based reasons, like someone's political affiliation or for political coercion reasons. So if that is something, we would definitely help people if they face retaliation. It's not so much a Hatch Act problem as sort of an unfair personnel practice issue. but it is probably true that many people can be accessed on how they vote. And I would hope that wouldn't matter, but if it was, it's something we would try to look into protecting employees through probably the existing statute, the prohibited personnel practice statute. Let me just talk about Keitha's question. Since official duty rules apply to telework, that's true. Can a yard sign stay outside during my workday? Yes, you don't have to keep taking it down. Don't have it in the background of your Zoom call, just keep, but yes, you can put it up outside and keep it out, even though technically your kitchen is your workplace for your day, but you can keep that out in your yard. Yeah, fundraising for groups not specifically tied, but given, I'm sorry, Eli's question, what about fundraising for groups that are not tied to a political party, but given their policy goals, the group is likely to advocate for one party over the other? Are we allowed to fundraise for a group like this in our free time? So yes, you do want to sort of look at their materials and how close to the line they get. Is it perfectly obvious that they're 100% for one party or the other? But if it's for, reproductive rights, and again, not to get into hot potato during working hours, but if reproductive rights, you're allowed to participate and fundraise for that. But just take a look at the group's public information, what they say on websites, that kind of thing, to make sure they're not too close to the line. Okay, so Paul is saying someone ran for a school board and this person looks like they resigned. Yeah, I'm sure it's okay to resign. I would like to think you could go short of that and just take a leave of absence, but I'm not sure. And I'll look at that Loudoun Times article and can look into that if people are interested in running for office.
I got a direct question. Can we talk about partisan candidates with coworkers after work, like at a happy hour?
Yes, that's your own time. And many of our friends come from the workplace. So of course it makes sense you might be talking with your friends and they happen to also be coworkers. So so you can. And again, that's after hours on your own time. And so yes, that's definitely fine. And I would say probably pretty commonplace. Kathleen's question, honestly, I'm not sure. Fundraising for issue-focused groups, could you check their status as a 501c3? Would that clearly answer the question? I'm just not sure if that status does clearly answer it one way or the other. I can think about it, but I'm not sure. And sorry not to be able to answer all questions, but if you go to the OSC's website, you'll see there's like 50 FAQs talking about every little configuration and what's on one side of the line and what's on the other. So I can definitely get back to people, or you could always look at osc.gov yourself. It has a long list of guidance for employees. Does anyone else have any other questions they want to float in the chat?
All right, seems like we might, seems like we might have gotten all of our questions.
Well, thanks to everybody. If you have any questions later, feel free to give them to Elizabeth or Lee and they'll find their way to me and I can do my best to get back to you. And I can do a little more thinking of that 501c3 because of course there are a lot of issue groups out there. So I can try to figure out what the right line drawing is for fundraising.
I just wanted to add that today's presentation was recorded and I'll be sending out an email with this and the recording from the last presentation on Schedule F by tomorrow. So I'll get those recordings out, check for any final questions, and then we can wrap up.
Thanks so much. Really appreciate it. Thank you, Lee. Thank you, Allie. Thanks to everyone who joined, participated, listened in. We'll see you next time.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks all. Thanks, Allie. Thanks, Elizabeth.